Good day, folks. Welcome back to my neck of the woods. My name's Dika, where I share my experience and my knowledge, hoping to lessen your learning curve along the way. So today, I'm going to talk about deer tracks and what deer tracks can tell us. What do they tell us, and how can we read deer tracks to help us be better hunters? So before I get started, please sub the channel, like some videos, and make some comments. You know that I love the comments. All right, so I'm going to get right into this, and I'm going to talk about deer tracks. And so what can a deer track tell us? So when we look down and we're looking for deer tracks, we're going to know a few things right off the bat. We're going to know which direction the deer is going, or which direction the deer came from. As a deer track, I'm going to draw some deer tracks in a little bit, and which direction they're going to or from, and how big the deer is. So a small deer print is going to range between like 3 and 4 inches long. Width is a whole nother story. Or a larger deer, maybe a big buck, might be 5 to 6 inches long. There's few and far between. A big deer may have some small ones, but the width might be a little different. But for the most part, you're going to be able to tell whether it's a big deer or whether it's a small deer, right? And you're going to be able to tell whether the deer is running or the deer is walking. Now, a lot of this applies to mud or snow or dirt, earth, soil. The deer tracks are very easy to pick out. It's a bit more challenging if you're looking into leaves or other types of terrain, or just the general forest floor with the sticks and twigs and everything like that. But it can still be examined and it can still be interpreted. It's just a little more challenging to find the tracks. But I'm going to talk about the ones that you can see and how to interpret those. Now, another thing that you can tell is potentially how many deer there are walking, or how many deer there are in the area, or based in that line of tracks, how many there are. But you can be fooled, because a deer's front foot and a deer's back foot are significantly different in size. A deer's front foot is significantly bigger than their back feet. This is in all deer. And to give you a little background as to how I get this information, obviously I'm a hunter and I've been a hunter for quite some time, but a large portion of the venison that makes it to my freezer comes from roadkill. So I have the ability to really look at deer, and I see a lot of deer. Obviously, I pick up roadkills, and a lot of the roadkills I'm not able to salvage, so some of them just get dumped. But I am able to study the animals and their anatomy inside and out. I do process all my own deer, and I've been doing that for upwards of, I think, 6 or 7 years now. I've been doing that, and I've been hunting for 12. So I do get to examine a lot of deer and full autopsies, and I know the anatomy, and I'm a nurse by trade. So I have a strong background in anatomy and how organs and things like that work anyway. So, but you not to be fooled by the deer. So you're going to see small tracks and you're going to see big tracks. You may come up on tracks and you're like, oh good, I got some tracks, I want to look at them. And almost on top of each other, there's small tracks. Those are usually the back feet. Usually the big tracks that we see are usually the front feet. And they have the dew claws. There's kind of a, I guess you can say I'm going to call it a myth, that if you see the dew claws, then it's a buck. It really just means it's a front foot, in my opinion, in my experience. The dew claws are on the back foot, but they're higher up on the leg, and it takes a lot of pressure. Unless they're really sprinting or maybe even going uphill, or probably more uphill than downhill, you're going to see those back dew claws. But for the most part, what we're looking at when we find big tracks, or we find big buck tracks, or we find big doe tracks, we're looking at the front feet, because the back feet are significantly smaller. Now, like people say that buck tracks are bigger. I disagree. I do know that bucks, they get bigger than does, and those tracks are bigger. But if you take a doe and a buck of equal size, be it a yearling or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 years old, or they just weigh the same, the tracks are relatively the same. The hoofs, the cloven hoof that the deer has, they're relatively the same size. If the deer weighs more, when it puts that track, sometimes it will spread out and the space between the hooves will be different. So deer carry their weight up front for the most part. They have their head, they have their antlers, their chest, and a wider cavity. So the footprint is just bigger up front for doe and buck, just to carry the load. You know, I mean, it's the same thing in people. Usually, the more someone is they weigh or how tall they are, the bigger feet they have. So I'm 6'2", I have a size 12 shoe. Now, I probably would not have a size 7 shoe if I was 6'2". For the most part, they don't. Guys or women or whatever, people that are like 6'5", they have size 13 and 14 shoes. People that are short and aren't carrying, I understand weight and obesity, that can change it, but that usually doesn't apply to deer. For the most part, they're athletic animals, and there's no obesity within the deer population. So it follows the same as human beings. A shorter statured person or someone who weighs less is going to have smaller feet for the most part. Excuse me, thirsty here. So I'm going to do a little drawings here to give you a little anatomy on my findings in deer. Excuse me, let me get my glasses off here. All right, so I have a whiteboard here. Obviously you can see my lamp, everything. I'm going to try to cut down on the glare as best I can, but I'm going to do a little drawing here. So I'm not an artist by any means, so bear with me. So I am going to give you a basic idea of what a deer track looks like. I'm sure most people know, especially if you're chiming in on this, you know what a deer track looks like. So for the most part, you know, and then we got dew claws here, and then I will, this one, and then dew claws. All right, so for the most part, this is what a deer track looks like. We have the cloven hooves up here, and then we have the dew claws back here, which are just the claws that are further up the leg. So when we see the dew claws in, too much of a glare, oh well, what can you do? When you see the dew claws, it just means that more pressure has been applied to that area of the deer's foot to imprint the dew claws into the dirt or the mud. It could be they're heavy. It could be that they're running. It could be that the mud is deep and it just causes more pressure in there. So that would give you an idea there. So food for thought here. So I'm going to erase this for just a minute here, and I'm going to draw another one. So this, and then, all right. So if you're looking at these are two different sizes. This would be a deer's front foot, and this would be a deer's back foot. Those dew claws, they are further back on a rear foot of a deer. All of them, not just one or two. I mean, I'm sure there's an abnormality within the deer population, but for the most part, the front feet are bigger and the dew claws are closer or further down on the leg, which in turn will give you that dew claw print that is not necessarily a buck. It just means that it's the front foot for the most part, and it's bigger. So there's another thing you can tell from a deer's foot. So I'm going to erase again here. I'm going to draw two tracks that are the same size. Now this is just food for thought, this next part that I'm going to point out here. I'm not really sure how much it helps us out as hunters, but it is something that I've seen in deer, and it's almost, I'm going to say it's 99% of the deer, and it's really subtle and hard to pick out, but it's true. All right, so here are two, what we can call them front deer tracks, right? So on one side, the lateral side, which means the outside, medial means towards the middle, right? Medial towards middle, lateral means outside. The lateral portion of the hoof, so say this one. So say this is the deer, right? And this is its right, and this is its left, right? you're going to be able to identify that hoof just by looking at it, whether it's a right foot or a left foot. This section, the lateral section, the outside section, is just going to be a little bit bigger. So it's going to have like an extra curve on the outside, and this one over here. So it's just going to have another curve. It's just going to be a little bit bigger on the outside. I think it's just how they walk. I know some people, like, you look at the bottom of your shoes and like you've had your shoes for a long time and it'll be worn on one side. It's just the way you walk. But a deer's hoof is a little bit bigger on the lateral side. So this would be, so if you pick one up and you're looking at it, and obviously you have to hold it in the right orientation as the deer would walk. And if the lateral or the outside one is a little bit bigger, it's the side that it's on. So it'd be if it's the left one, then the left one would be just a little bit bigger on the outside. Food for thought. That's just something that I sort of saw and I've seen on deer, and we'll go from there. So to wrap this up, there's obviously a lot of things you can tell from deer tracks. I don't know how much this left or right thing could do for you. I mean, maybe if there was a deer that you were watching or you caught something on camera and had a limp on the right side, maybe the deer track would be different, it'd be a different orientation. Maybe it'd be rolled a little bit or something of that nature. But it's just a little information that I picked out. And older deer obviously are going to have bigger prints. And I think bucks do have bigger prints, but only up into the adult age. So a 4-year-old buck and a 4-year-old doe that are equal in weight, I think their hooves are going to be the same size. But a lot of times bucks just gain more weight. They're just heavier, especially during the rut. So because they weigh more, that's why their hoof would be bigger. Make sense? It's not necessarily bigger because they're bucks. It's just because they predominantly weigh more than doe. I've been out tracking and I've seen gigantic tracks that I could swear that they were a buck. It turns out they're doe. It's just a giant doe. Giant does with giant tracks. And there's one other thing you can tell, and I don't think you can tell this from the track. I mean, a track that's like, say they're both relatively small. Say they're 4 or 5 inches, right? And one is just a really, really sharp kind of narrow track. Say it's in the snow, right? And it's really sharp and really defined. And then you see another one where it's the same size, but it's wide, and it maybe has some irregularities around the edge, or it's just rough around the edges. I would presume that is an older deer than the other one, even though the hooves are the same size. Just from being alive longer, they have more wear and tear on their hooves. Their hooves they're not bone. I don't know if you know that. They're made up of like a keratinized material, which is very similar to our fingernails. Very similar to like a horse's hoof, horse's hoof, and it wears. So it wears. It continues to grow back, but it wears as it moves through life. So a younger deer is going to have a smooth, more defined, narrow, sharp-looking track. And if you see one of the same size that has irregularities and it may be widened a little bit, and it just looks rough, especially like in mud. If you see them side by side, I would guesstimate that was an older deer just because they've been alive longer. All right, that's all I have for you about tracks. Hopefully it helps you. Hopefully you learn something. And sub the channel and like some videos, and I'll talk to you guys later. Be well.